Good afternoon. As you can guess, I have a sore throat, so let's keep this short. And I'm also going to do the radio broadcast as well. But for now, I want to start with the radio one because I want to let you know I got my hair done finally and so touched up and everything else. And in addition to that, I wanted to let you know that I still need you to subscribe to our channel, which is easy to do. All you have to do is click on the subscribe command on the computer, on the YouTube page where you're watching this video, and also check out the other videos that we have as well. They're all available and they're all free. Now, I also want to make sure that you understood that I am very sorry if some of you get a little bit perturbed when the fact is that we have advertising on our videos. These things are getting to be very expensive to make, and we need to offset the operating cost of producing them. Like I said before, you're more than welcome to send donations, which I have not seen any from anybody or very many comments either. I don't know what you really want, so I guess like Adam Savage says on Mythbusters, I reject your reality and substitute my own. But that's not really the best way to think, and I really would like to see you tell me more specifically what you'd like to see. Because this is your channel. This is your chance to see the things you want. And I am also, as I said, much more comfortable with radio than television. But, as I said, you tell me which ones you like better. I'm open to your comments. Now, a couple times I tried to do the radio broadcast, but ran into all kinds of technical mites. Some of them are just unexplainable because we don't have the problem when doing the videos. So we don't know if it's the audio capture software or the audio cables, and we're using an audio capture mode, which is a different program or whatever the case may be. But several times in my radio broadcast, it has resulted in all kinds of unpleasant side effects, from a sound dropping out in the middle of a sentence to incomplete broadcasts that resulted in nothing we recorded at all. Now, I usually can hear in the microphone is doing very well for the video, and so I'm tending to wonder what the story here is. Now, in the other thing too is that the last radio broadcast only had 11 listeners, at least official listeners. There were YouTube people that picked up the radio broadcast. Now, one of the most important things you have to understand with the last podcast, it was more of a short story skit, and it should not be taken as anything other than what it was about. The way me and Lomi see the fiscal cliff events. Now, some people would like to make a big deal about it and say that we're loopy and we're all screwy, but that's not accurate. Some would say we are actually very informed, and in that sense, we're as crazy as a fox. That is, we know what's going on, and we can make satire of it because we understand the grave nature of the issue of the fiscal and financial situation of the United States. It's watching these congressional critters that are constantly coming out there and talking to us and telling us that they just don't worry about the budget or the budgetary concerns the same as John and Jane Doe American. This is why we get into such a disconnect between the two. The American people, the ones in the trenches, the ones who work and make those money, that makes it possible for Congress to pay for fighter planes, tanks, Death Stars, whatever we are the ones who know the truth of what's going on with our money is being squandered on projects we do not need. On January 12th, President Obama responded to the request to build a Star Wars type Death Star as shown in episode 6. He decided it is not a good time for us to pursue such an event because we do not have the $850 billion to throw at such a project. Number 2, we really have no justifiable reason to have such a thing with a massive planet-cracking weapon. However, anybody who wants to invest their own money and wants to build this project through their own contractors is more than welcome to do so. Sadly enough, the same is true with a gentleman who wants to build a working example of the Starship Enterprise Constitution class. Now, the same problem with you is the cost. The difference between the Death Star and the Starship Enterprise design is the Starship Enterprise design would allow us to easily get to Mars and other planets within our solar system in the comfortable leisure of having a nice stateroom, artificial gravity, and a large enough ship that would provide for food and sustenance that we need for a 6-month journey. But our Congress and our President cannot afford to build this, and therefore you need to consider that if you are willing to do this out of your own tab, please go for it. Maybe you might be able to get the support of Paramount Pictures to have them put the Starship Enterprise into a reality. I know that this was a research by space engineer who really worked hard to design the plans of this vessel. But like the Death Star idea, our country cannot afford to build this at this time. That doesn't mean that some individual cannot do so on their own tab. Perhaps SpaceX or one of the other commercial space programs might be willing to help make it a possibility. Something to think about. Now, one of the things I also wanted to take the time to talk to you about is the importance of the beautiful nature of the radio versus video. Now, I did not get a chance to explain this in the radio broadcast because we had technical problems, and because of those technical problems, nothing was able to get out to you, despite my definite and long-winded and clarified explanation. I will try to say this on the video, and I will try to get another radio broadcast in, but I don't know if my throat is up to doing 2 long broadcasts. So here we go. I like radio because there is no need to worry about what it looked like in front of the camera. I like radio because I don't have to worry about lighting or having physical props in my hand. I like radio because it makes it less irritating for me and Lumi, because on the radio, you hear two voices and you naturally assume that there are two completely separate physical people sitting in two separate chairs in the studio. It saves a lot of hard time to explain things, and it gives you a chance to use your imagination. Writing radio programs, radio dramas, is a real easier event. We don't have to have set designers. We don't have to have cosmopolitan or makeup people doing your makeup every day. We don't have to worry about lighting. We don't have to worry about big fancy sets. In a radio broadcast, you can do it in a room that's the size of the one I'm in now. 12 foot by 12 foot. And that will allow you to make the best things happen. You don't have to be beautiful physically on radio. You could look like death warmed over, but with the right voice, you can sound like a superstar. That is one of the things that made radio a boon for many people in the early days of radio. Is they may not have been physically attractive enough for movies, but if you had the voice, you could go out there and be part of something wonderful. Kathy Lewis, who did the voice of Jane Stacy on My Friend Irma, was not the most perfect person for the movies or the TV show. But she was a highly talented actress. On radio, she excelled, and she did wonderfully. My brothers and sisters, on radio, no one knows what you look like. As long as your voice carries the thoughts and emotions that you're trying to portray when reading a script of your character. In the case of live broadcasting, radio gives you a little bit more chance to relax. The audience may not know if you're sitting there with a big frown on your face because you missed a cue. That's okay, as long as you appear to be natural and your character is good. Or if you're doing a live newscast, no one has to see the tears coming out of your eyes when you hear about the sad truth of somebody dying a violent and bloody death. But we can assume that you're being affected just as much as everybody else is. Radio gives you the ability to use your imagination. It gives you ability to exercise the creative potential. Radio is friendly to the blind because we don't have to worry about watching the screen because we can't see it anyway. Radio makes it possible for people to multitask and do other things, like in case my hairdresser was listening to my show while cutting my hair, and he said, "This is much easier than watching a video where I have to constantly look over my shoulder to see what's going on TV." You have to understand that people in this day and age really have no idea of the beauty of the audio-only medium. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to do my damnedest to show you the blessed features of radio, as well as continue to do video broadcasts when I can. But let's be honest, that I prefer being in front of a microphone than I do in front of a camera. I'm not the most attractive person in the world. I'm not very photogenic. I've tried to be the best I can be, but sometimes I just don't feel so worthy. You have to figure that out, that as we grow up in this day and age of video and everything else around us, that we have lost out on some of the blessings of the radio medium. YouTube could easily have an ability to make it easier for audio broadcasters, to allow them to upload files in MP3, OGG Vorbis, and WAV. And therefore, you can have a simple little application script that would add a photograph as a cover art for your broadcast. Instead of making me and others have to go through all these complicated steps to turn a radio broadcast into a static imaged video just so YouTube can process it. We need to remember that radio is a beautiful thing. Radio, when properly used, is an art form that allows us to create new things, new stories, to boldly go where video cannot go without spending a couple $billion in fancy special effects and special writers and set decorators. With radio, you use the power of your mind to create the set, to create the story, to create the concept, and what the characters look like. That's the power of radio. The power of radio is that we can reach out and speak directly to your mind. Television is passive in the sense that the producers and directors provide all the elements, and there's no imagination required on the eye of the viewer. That's not the way it is with radio. Maybe that's why so many in these generation of ADD and ADHD do not like radio, because it is cerebral and requires one to use an imagination. Anybody who's ever written a story knows what I'm talking about. You have the ability to make the viewer on television is just a passive observer. When you write a book or a radio drama or a radio comedy, the listener is much more interactively brought into the story. That is what makes radio so beautiful and special. Incidentally, I wanted to let you know that I would like you to help me and other people that want to support the radio medium. Please get in contact with the whitehouse.gov We the People website and send this petition. We the people would like the Federal Communications Commission to make it easier for small community people to create a radio station in a way that is not going to break the bank. We understand that there's only so many available radio frequencies. No problem there. But why do we have to pay $3,000 to apply to be part of an auction? Why do we have to pay $3,000 that makes it an exclusive membership? Because people may not have $3,000 to invest into video or audio applications. We're talking about somebody who's trying to make their dream come true. They may not need a 250-watt license. They might only need a 12-watt license. Yet, at the same time, Part 15 radio under CFR 147 states that you only are allowed a maximum transmitted power of 100 milliwatts, or 1/10 of a watt. Commercial radio broadcast licenses start at 250 watts and above. What happens to the power levels between 1/10 of a watt and 250 watts? We're talking about AM radio, medium wave, not FM. Because we all know that FM radio is a very busy spectrum. Lots of signals being crammed into a small radio dial of 88 megacycles to 108 megacycles on the frequency modulation. Whereas on AM radio, radio signals from 540 kilocycles to 1.6 megacycles allows us to reach more people. So many AM radio stations gave up their licenses years ago. There is bandwidth, and there certainly is, for a small station that wants to transmit to a small town or a small group of people in, say, a few blocks of a city. For that, we don't need 250 watts. More than likely, 12 watts or so would be more than adequate to reach those people. But I also must remind you that whichever they say is that we must remember that this is a very powerful medium. Unfortunately, many times over, radio has been used to cause grave damage and grave disservices to the community in the form of propaganda, and that's what we need to watch out for. A radio person behind the microphone must understand that they are carrying equivalent of a loaded gun. They can use it to hunt moose, or they can use it to kill people. In radio, we may not physically kill people, but our broadcasts have long and dear implications, both good and bad. When we choose what we cover, that's something to remember. All the times that me and Lumi have been on the radio, and I have been broadcasting my Part 15 AM radio station now for over 5 years. It has always been my dream since I was a little girl to have a licensed radio station to serve my community. I love radio, and I love the ability of doing things with radio. Maybe it's because I'm legally blind that to me, radio is a beautiful tool that makes my life so much more enjoyable. I remember listening to a local radio station called WSNG AM 1610 out of Torrington. And when I was in middle school, and they would carry classical music. And it was a beautiful time for me. I'd be sitting in my tree fort, listening to the radio, listening to Bach, Chopin, Beethoven, and enjoying the program with absolute gusto. Or listening to the radio dramas at night, such as replaying of The Lone Ranger, My Friend Irma, and many others. I never watched television much as a child. I spent most of my time in front of my 5-transistor AM radio. That is what I enjoyed. And that, to me, is the most magical part of my childhood. Listening to the radio and listening to the stories as they come over the airwaves. Sometimes as far away as Chicago, or once in a great while, nowadays, I might pick up a station from Philadelphia. Brothers and sisters, this is what makes radio beautiful. It touches the hearts of so many people, where television, for some, is just not magic. It's a magical thing when I can pick up a 5-transistor AM radio or an old vacuum tube All-American 5, like the one that's in my kitchen, and tune the dial and hear stations from all over the area. I even get a station from Canada, a station called AM 840, I think it is. And I listen to the music they would have at night and the stories. And it's like yesterday once more. FM doesn't have that ability. FM is like, compared to AM, is like an MP3 versus a well cared for 33 RPM long player record. The radio AM gives you that natural affinity to understand things as you can hear the sounds of lightning in the background, the heterodyne effect of sometimes the two stations are close together, the static of people's turning on the fluorescent light fixtures, the sounds from music from all over the country, stories, all being covered on radio. I wish I could say the same was the television, but the sad truth is that television is a medium that has provided everything for you. You don't have to use your imagination with television. You don't really become as engrossed in a television broadcast. YouTube has the ability to make it easier to satisfy the small group of people that want to provide and upload audio broadcasts. I have contacted YouTube on feedback page, and I have asked them to consider the possibility of making it easier to upload audio broadcasts. I have not heard anything from them. In addition, perhaps you can help by again letting them know what I'm interested in seeing. Now, as far as the audio broadcasts go, I noticed in the last few days that there has not been very many of you watching, or should I say, listening to the broadcast. The radio drama obviously was not very popular, and I apologize that it really wasn't scripted that well. It wasn't scripted at all, it was just a spur of the moment thing. But I'm going to share something with you. And again, this is where radio really excels, and that is when I tell stories on the radio, you don't know how to see how close I get to the paper. Now, as you will see, this is fairly large print, but even so, I have to get really close to the page. Now, this is called The Dryad and the Logger. And this was written when I was in Litchfield Street in Torrington. I want you to turn the video off right now, if you can. And I want you to use your imagination and your mind's eye and listen to the story. The Dryad and the Logger by MicheleMarieDalene. My life before I became a dryad was very basic. I was a young girl who always spent my time among the trees. Back then, I never did think much of what logging was or how it was performed. My parents had a wood home. To me, it was just the way things were. I never did really think of how the wood was acquired. I considered it quite normal. One day, when I was spending time in my favorite wooded area with my favorite maple tree, I had an education, which I will always remember. I saw this big machine. It was a beast that could take a tree down in 10 seconds. Slowly, the mechanical monster was coming to my own favorite tree where I was sitting. I saw the machine was run by a man in the cab of the beast. The hungry and large chainsaw blade was coming at my tree. I felt my favorite tree's fear. I felt a voice in my head. Save me, Alyssa. I don't want to die. I am a sugar maple. I was at the time about 18 years old. I wasn't normally very gutsy, but I knew I had to stop the mechanical beast stealing my nerve. I stood right in front of the mechanical monster. The driver yelled at me to move. I, with all my fury, yelled back, "No, leave my tree alone." The driver swore as he stopped the beast and got out of the cab. Listen, Missy, I have a job to do. My company has logging rights. You are in the way of my job, he fumed as he walked up to me. Move it. I stood there steadfastly. No, any tree but this one. This is mine, and he is my friend. The logger swore with language that still makes me blush even today. He got on his radio, told his boss I was there, and I would not let him cut my tree down. I heard his boss reply that he would come out and talk with me and him about my tree. It was at that time I considered myself more than just a teenage girl who loved trees. I took the title of Dryad at that point. It was fitting and was really quite an honest title. His boss came out to the site. He was about 34 years old. I explained that I am a dryad of the sugar maple. He shrugged and turned to the machine operator. Leo, there is lots of trees. Leave this one be. I don't want to get into a problem with a person who claims to be a dryad. The environmentalists would have a field day. Leo shrugged. Her tree is in the way of the rest. My machine is too big to go around it. What should we do? Should we move this tree, chop it down, and plant a new tree? His boss frowned. You don't know dryads, do you? You cut that tree and she will die along with it. I don't want to do that. Yes, let's move the tree and the dryad. Let's find a place where she can be. Perhaps up at the hill at Charlotte Hungerford Hospital. There is a field there. If the hospital is willing to allow us to replant it there, then she and her tree will be left alone. Leo frowned. Okay, I agree to hold off while you talk with the hospital's landscaping staff. The man pulled out his cellular brick phone and called some people. About 10 minutes later, it was agreed that the tree and I would be relocated. Now, I don't really live near the hospital, as it was over 20 minutes away by car. I was becoming part of my tree. My tree had always been a comfort to me. It spoke to me in its way of reaching into my mind. Join me. I can give you shelter, warmth, and food. You're welcome to enter me, and you and I will go together to this special place. I touched the tree as I spoke back. Take me with you. Let me be your dryad. To Leo and his boss, it was quite a shock when the tree absorbed me into its body. My head was all that was human. I will stay with my tree. I will go with it. I will die with it, if it shall be. Leo stood there with his mouth agape, as he could not believe what he'd seen. Did she become part of her tree? Impossible. His boss smiled with admiration. Yes, she is a real dryad, not one of those tree huggers we often encounter. Therefore, we must keep our promise to her and her tree. Several days later, a crew with a special truck that digs out whole trees and transplanted came. It wrapped itself around my tree and with care dug it up. My tree was scared, but I gave it comfort as it wasn't going to die. The whole tree was moved over the roads and highways to the field of the hospital, where a hole was already prepared for me and my tree. We were carefully placed into the hole and were now safely out of the way of the hungry chainsaw monster. Sadly, I felt a need to ask others to be spared. Most of the trees did not have a dryad, but I still felt it would be wrong to kill a tree without a new tree to replace it. The boss came over to me. Are you happy here in your new home? He asked. I smiled. Yes, thank you. I have a request. When you are done with all the logging, will you and your team plant new trees there? He sighed. Well, there are plans to build a condominium complex there. We were hired to clear land and sell the wood to the mills. If I could, would you like me to save some more trees? It is not cheap, but I do like that little forest area myself. I would be honored to save some more of your friends out of my own pocket. I was happy to hear that. If that is all you can do, I will accept that. Several weeks later, several more of my favorite trees were replanted. Unfortunately, the really big ones were too hard to move, and they ended up becoming lumber. The smaller ones were much easier to move. I was happy I had saved some of the old trees. I was one of the first new generation of dryads. At first, I got lots of publicity. Eventually, however, I was alone with my loving tree. Several other women and men of various ages that often walked by my many woodlands decided to take on the role of dryads. We had many good times, but for me, I wanted to be with my tree. It is true that when the manager of the logging team had moved my tree, I had merged with it. That was to make it easier for me to go with my tree. Unlike some of the other dryads of the past and a few of the new generation, I am not bound to physically remain inside my tree. Of course, it does make it easier when it's raining or snowing. I get a warm place to sleep, and my tree feeds me maple sap. I also enjoy eating the local fruits and berries in the forest. The thing that I love is that I'm surrounded by nature. Of course, I do have to endure the hideous sounds of the ambulances as they scream the sirens up the hill to the emergency room of the hospital. I got to know and love the animals that live in my little wood forest home. The squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, hares, and raccoons, even the occasional skunk. I have watched them raise families, grow old, and die. I have watched the hospital itself grow bigger as it expanded to provide more and more services. It was understood that my little forest would not be touched in any expansion, as it is considered a sanctuary by the hospital staff. Sadly, my forest is off the main path, and I don't get many visitors. Oh, how I loved my tree. However, I really wanted to have someone to share my love with on a human level. I tried dating the dryad boys, but I felt I wasn't getting anywhere. I saw the human and dryad girls, and something inside of me was getting excited to see another female. The girls themselves thought I was weird. They stayed away. Some became dryads of the trees far from me. Others just walked away and never returned. They quietly laughed behind my back, calling me all kinds of names. Yet, as I look back at those times, I knew that I would someday find my special someone. Perhaps she, too, would become a dryad. One day, a human female adult came to my tree. She was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, a tall red head. She wore a white dress with a pattern of leaves and branches. Now, I wasn't sure what I was to expect. Somehow, I had the feeling that she would be the one. She smiled warmly at me. Her smile was like a giant solar flare. It wasn't perfect. She was missing a front tooth. No matter. She was stunning, and I felt some excitement at having her visiting me. Her name was Claire. Claire was very happy to see me as well. We spent several hours talking about trees, forests, and wildlife. She was unhappy to have been forced to accept modern life and its disregard for nature and the gifts of the trees. She wanted to return to nature, but until she had met me, she did not know how she could have done so. She had arrived at my tree during the most special time, early spring. Like me, she was a lesbian. Unlike me, she didn't question her feelings. She embraced them openly. I must have had an impact, as I could smell her pheromones, and she was definitely smelling my own maple enhanced pheromones. I was not really ready for the sheer power of the feelings I was feeling. I was becoming more and more excited. I never felt this with the boys. I did feel it sometimes with the girls I saw, but nothing to this intensity. I strongly hoped that she would remain with me. She was interested in the idea, but she had an apartment and would have to clear it out. Of course, that is normally true. However, her apartment wasn't too far away. She could bind with a tree and maintain her current home. She would have to visit it daily. She was happy to hear a compromise could be worked out. She wanted to have a tree too. After we walked through the little forest, she chose a maple tree 2 down from mine. The pine tree was interested in her, however, as I pointed out to her, the pine tree sap isn't nice to long hair. Her red hair was shoulder length and would have been a gloppy, gooey mess. Pines are, for that reason, mainly chosen by men who are bald or going bald, as they didn't care too much. Not saying that maple sap doesn't gunk up your hair. It does. However, there's a nice pool of water where I wash my hair out. My tree also makes an effort not to gunk it up too bad when I am in it. After several weeks of traveling back and forth from her apartment, Claire and I had decided to build a small home in the forest itself. That was a challenge of its own, as what materials were the best. There was lots of rocks, but without mortar, they would be hard to keep in place. I decided to use mud mixed with concrete. The hospital's landscaping crews agreed to help by providing the materials needed. It wasn't much as far as home went. It was about the size of an apartment, 264 square feet. Quietly, she moved into her stuff from her apartment to our little home. She would, of course, keep her apartment to appear normal to outsiders. Like me, she de-aged about 20 years. Her missing tooth was being replaced by others moving in to fill its space. It fixed her overbite and made her look happier. She had always looked like she had a permanent frown on her face until then. Her hair grew thicker, and I could see that she was finally in her element. She thrived, as did her tree. Before she took it, the tree was barely holding on. This is also available on Elfwood. I put it up there as well. And I hope that you get an idea if you use my exercise to use the ability to use your imagination. Thank you everybody for listening, and please do not forget to subscribe to the channel or to leave us comments. This is your chance to tell us what you want and how you want to make it work. Good night, everybody.